We're talking with Anne Reid about the release of her 24th recording, Winter Springs, Summer Falls, new CD coming out with a concert as part of the St. Joan of Arc concert series. So, big event coming up, big release, years in the making.
Years in the making.
For this.
Yes.
And many brand new songs, some that people know,
Mhm.
and some that you didn't write.
Some that I didn't write, which is a little unusual for me. I don't do covers very often. So there are 10 songs that are new of mine. And I did 2 songs of mine that I'd always wanted to hear a women's choir behind these songs, Carolyn's Party and Leap of Faith. And so that was an experiment, and it went well. And the 2 songs that I didn't write, Joan Griffith is not only a wonderful bass player, but she actually her first instrument is the guitar. And she's a jazz guitar player, and she is always introducing me to new songs and saying, "You should sing this song. You should sing this song." So she, a couple years ago, introduced me to A Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square, which is a beautiful song. I hadn't heard it before. And she said, you really should do this song. And I thought, well, so then I listened to Rosemary Clooney singing, and I thought, yeah, that's a pretty song. That's,
Yeah.
So Joan and I started doing it. And more people were saying, you should record that because it sounds great. And so we recorded that, and another song that a friend of mine just said, you need to do Blackbird. She said, you would sound so good singing Blackbird. And I had my doubts, but loved it. Joan and Nightingale Sang and Blackbird, Joan and I sat together in the studio and just did them live, and it was wonderful.
And so the new recording has a very strong sense of nature. I mean, we've got birds in here.
We have birds.
There are trees.
Oh, we have birds,
know.
we have trees, yes.
The sun makes an appearance.
All of the songs actually fit into, and this was actually the first time that I had worked on a theme. I had worked on putting together songs that all of them fit into a season. And there were some of them that I thought, ooh, I'm kind of playing with this a little bit, but still energy, the seasons themselves. I mean, one of them actually is about solstice, winter solstice. There's one that's called You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, and I thought, where is this one going to fit? But yeah. It has that energy of summer. It has that relentless sort of high energy of summer to me. So that's where I put it.
The world is always with us.
The world is
and
always with us.
It's throughout this new recording,
Yes.
Which is great. But I can remember you writing about wanting to be a U.S. Ranger.
Yes.
I mean, I think of you as a city person, but really that natural element is so strong with you. You could easily be a Canadian Mountie, even if you weren't American.
If only.
If only,
If
right.
only. I did. I think that if I weren't a musician, if I didn't have that career of being a musician, I think I would do something like being a ranger or working outside. I'm very drawn to that, and I spend a lot of time in my garden. I enjoy hiking. I prefer the out of doors. But I also like living in the city. So I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah. Right. Well, but even living in the city, you are a person who is out a lot. You're on your bike.
I'm on my bike.
You are a prolific bike rider.
I am. This is the way I prefer to get around town, is on my bike. Yes.
Well, which makes sense, I think, because it connects in many ways to living a more purposeful life in that you are a good steward, an environmentalist.
I think that that's true, and I think the reason that I actually chose to do that, I mean, it was a very conscious choice to ride my bike more, to get around in the city more on my bike when, I think of people who go to the post office or the store and it's only a couple miles away. Why get into a car? And the more I ride my bike and the more I'm out on my bike, the more I feel the freedom of being on a bike, and also more aware than I am in a car. I think on a bike, you're just so aware of your environment, because if you don't, you're going to get hit. So,
Right,
I
yeah.
mean, you could be in big trouble. As opposed to a car where it's just sort of, you're in this big thing and you're surrounded by metal and you're going to just drive.
Uh-huh,
So
right. You're isolated.
you're isolated.
Yeah. And
Right.
you don't want to be isolated.
No.
You are in
No, it's easy enough to get isolated anyway. So
Right.
we're fine.
Well, that's true, but isn't that also part of the job, in a sense, as a songwriter and a person who is an observer, that you experience things? You can't have a lot of walls around you.
Well, you can't, but I think part of my process is kind of going out and experiencing all of that, and then coming back to that place of just sitting with it and processing all of that. It takes me a long time to go through something, and I feel like I'm writing songs about things that happened a really long time ago. One of the songs on the new CD is about meeting my wife, and that was 32 years ago.
Sometimes it takes a while.
It just took
You
a
don't wanna
while,
rush.
that's all. It just took a while, that's all.
Uh-huh. Well, and that raises another interesting point, because obviously there are people in your songs.
Yes.
A lot of characters
Yes.
in your songs, but so many musicians will focus only on romantic love, right? It's all the songs are about that in one way or another, and there is that in your work, but it's not only that. There
No.
are characters in your songs who have nothing to do with that part of your life,
Right.
and nature is in there. I mean, it's really, the field is pretty wide open for you in terms of what you write about.
It is, and in the times that I have done workshops, when I've done songwriting workshops, a lot of people are writing about falling in love or falling out of love or being hurt, and there are so many other things to write about in your whole experience of just being a human being on this planet. Plus, it has the joy of writing about other people. So I wrote a song about Ruth Bader Ginsburg that's become a favorite of people, and but I write about a lot of different things. I find myself sort of surprised, and I kind of wonder sometimes if I've written enough love songs.
It's just the quota,
I mean,
a person
well,
has
well,
to write so many.
I'm just thinking that,
Yeah,
isn't that part of my
maybe.
job?
Well-
I'm supposed to write,
But that's the great thing, there's still time.
right?
Yes.
That's the nice part about being a writer, is that you can just keep writing until you drop dead. It's just, it's
Yeah.
great.
So I was looking at your list of 24 recordings and noticed early on you're doing an album every year or every other year, and wow, the 90s were great and really hard work. And then the spacing got a little wider, and most recently now with Winter, Spring, Summer, Falls, it's been 3-4 years.
4 years, yep. I used to write, I used to just go away, write the songs, then go into the studio and record all of them. It would just, block out this time. You'd put everything in there, get the musicians in, record it, mix it, so it'd just be all the stuff at once. And this one, I started writing the songs right after Eventually came out. And I thought, I'm going to do this as I want to do it. So I would write 2 or 3 songs. I'd call Jeff Sylvester. I'd say, I have 2 or 3 songs. I'm going to call Joan. I'm going to call Corey. We'll come in and we'll record them. So we had, over the course of 3.5, 4 years, just these songs that had been done very spaced out. But this had been on my mind for all this time. I mean, I've been thinking about it and writing for it. And I had some moments where I thought, are these songs even going to fit together? Even though you have the theme and you have the idea of everything fitting into the seasons. I thought, wow, I don't even know if this is going to work. And it did. It worked very well.
It sounds more like your prose writing process.
Right.
Than
Yeah.
where you do a page and then you leave it for a while and then you go back and you look at it.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And I think it gives you that, I don't know, the songs came out very, very different from one another. I think there's a lot of difference between the songs, and it's kind of a nice thing.
And that, as you said, that wasn't possible back in the early days, because when you were doing an album, it was like going to summer camp. You
It
had to
was.
go and bunk with people you didn't necessarily like, because you were going to be together for days and days. And by the time it was over, you were going to be happy to be rid of each other.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you kind of did a lockout in the studio. And when I think back on the studio process, you know, I've gone from recording on a 2-inch tape, you know, on a Studer deck, where it would be mixed down to a 1/4 inch, and you'd stand there while the engineer was cutting your tape and draping it over his neck and kind of going, now what song's next? Where is that? Oh, here it is, you know.
Yeah, it's in my pocket.
To a place where once upon a time I got an ADAT. So I put the machine in the living room and recorded in the living room. But I was no engineer, so I learned very quickly. I thought, you know what, you can't do all things. So we went back to recording in a studio.